1997, fantastic year. You've got Fallout, Grand Theft Auto, Titanic, the DVD, not the immersive prequel, Lava Lamps, GoldenEye, which I never played, Tony Blair, I heard he inspired a couple of games. But there is one oft forgotten title that came out in 1997. Actually, not so much forgotten as massively overshadowed by its younger brother, Diablo. Yes, that took me this many seconds to mention, even though you obviously read the title of the video. Either that or your hand slipped while you were working your way through a tub of Crayolas. Now, Diablo 2 is consistently praised as a genre-defining game. One so good that they decided to not make terrible cash grab sequels for it over a decade later. But, obviously, there had to be a Diablo 1 for there to be a Diablo 2. You just don't hear it mentioned with the same reverence. Or at all. This popped into my head randomly about a month ago and was bothering me, so I did a little bit of research. Not real research. I mean, I just asked a few people I knew were playing games when it was big. And of the two or so who had played it, I got nearly identical answers. I did play it, but not as much as Diablo 2. And I definitely played it, but it wasn't as memorable as Diablo 2. Now before I go any further, this could be down to a psychological phenomenon I'm going to dub the father sequel effect. Of the people I know, including myself, who were recommended or shown games in their youth on the Big Papa's PC, it always seems to be sequels. Age of Empires 2, but never 1. Stronghold 2, but never 1. Sometimes Crusader, but I don't know if that counts as a sequel. It's just kind of there. It's lateral. System Shock 2, but not, you understand. But putting that aside and focusing on Diablo, what, if anything, was wrong with it? Was Diablo 2 just that much of a step up? Was Diablo essentially a pilot for Diablo 2? A concept demo? A free sausage sample? I had to know. And finally, we come round to the video title. Does Diablo hold up? And when I say hold up, I don't mean does it work? Does it run? I mean, is it enjoyable? Is it playable? Is there any reason to play it over the 40 million other ARPGs that have come out in the last 20 years? And most importantly of all, how does it stack up to what is now the only Diablo game I haven't played? Maybe I'll let that one dry age for 27 years as well. I'll be playing with a Hellfire expansion on, as it adds some additional items and a class, and it's sort of the complete Diablo experience. I'll also be using the Devolution export, partially for quality of life, and partially because I'm not convinced Diablo will run natively on my stupid giant aircraft carrier of a PC. I don't want to have to force it to when there's multiple ports out there that'll just do it for me. And this video is about whether the game itself holds up. In the aid of holding it to a modern standard, I'll use any tools available that don't overhaul the game. Because it's still the Diablo experience, just because you've got higher resolution and the controls actually work.
Come on!
I'll be taking that as my final result, because none of you are playing this on a CRT monitor with a big Intel Pentium 2 Inside sticker on it, are you? And if you are, you probably know more about Diablo than me, you nerd. Okay, open game, watch computer cry in 144p, stop it crashing, select a class, rogue, and we're in Town Merchant, Magic Merchant, Healer, Elderman who obviously knows what's going on, some random NPCs and a Proto Gambler. And the dungeon. That is the whole game. You've got Tristram, you've got the dungeon. You go down the dungeon all the way to... So starting materialistic, they're cute. The advantage of pixel art like this is because it's still popular now. These games quite often age well. They age better than old 3D games. Like, look at this next to Bubsy 3D. It has proper lighting, and yes, enemies sort of pop into existence, but that's as much a resolution problem as anything else. With Devolution, I played a large portion of the game in a zoomed out state, which didn't really improve the visibility because the lighting was designed around the idea that you wouldn't be able to see that much. Really, it just made it harder to aim. There's a fair bit of sprite recoloring, and there aren't actually that many different environments, but they're pretty. Especially the hell segments near the end, they're really good. Actually, the visuals in general get more interesting the deeper you get into the game. It's like they got more and more inspired as they got further into development. Now, the combat loop, at least for a bow-wielding character like I played, was simple. Kite enemies, click on them till they die. I imagine warriors are much the same, with less kiting, and wizards are much different. Is it fair for me to review a game without playing them all? No, not really, but I'm not doing it 3 times. 4 if you count the monk. Now this isn't to say the combat's bad, just basic. After the first 5 minutes, you know how to play, and you're not going to shake that up much for the next few hours. I imagine in a purely action-based isometric game this would be a bit gash, but this is an RPG, so you have incremental power scaling from levels and equipment. There was satisfaction to peeling away just enough enemies so that you didn't get overwhelmed. Kiting them into a corridor where you just pepper them with arrows, force shooting into darkness where you suspect they're enemies and listening for the death sounds, that was cool. It's not entirely one-dimensional is what I'm trying to say, just close. I can't find a lot to praise it for, but I enjoyed it. People like Skyrim combat, that's terrible. In fact, in some ways, I'd say the items and progression are actually, comparatively speaking, the most primitive part of the game. The leveling system is standard XP for levels over time, but the only thing that leveling affects is your 4 stats. And for most characters, I'm guessing you're maybe putting into 2 to 3 of these stats. So realistically, you're doing almost the same thing every level. Not to mention I looked it up, and the stats do different things depending on your class. Not all of them, but like for a rogue and a warrior, dexterity do a different thing. Why? I mean, I get why it's to make the classes actually different instead of just thematic. As for items, there are 7 slots, 6 if you use a 200 weapon. 3 grades of item, normal, magic and rare/unique. You don't have white, blue, yellow, orange, green, red, whatever. It just goes white, blue, yellow. White is your base item, blue's got a magic property or 2, and yellow are like predetermined uniques you get mostly from quests. Quests are semi-randomized, but loot outside of them is actually weirdly scarce in the early game. At least for me. Since floors can only be cleared once, there's no farming for equipment or XP, so if you get unlucky, you're just screwed. Hellfire has alternate dungeons which give you some more areas to run through, but they're relatively high level, so for that early part of the game where you're struggling with equipment, it doesn't help. Also for a big chunk of the game, again the early game, rings are exceptionally rare, basically quest only items, and amulets, I never saw one, for about 4 or 5 floors. The vendors are level scaled to the floor of the dungeon, so it's not like you can even go to them and get amulets and rings. Now if you're a spellcaster, items and loot get cooler. Actually everything is cooler if you're spellcasting. You get traps, scrolls, you learn your spells from magic books instead of a skill tree, which is kind of cool, and if you get a duplicate book and activate it, it levels up the spell in the book. That's innovative. I just used it for heal, but not the point. I'm not saying it needs more variety for the other classes who just end up chugging potions and occasionally using a suspicious oil, but it needs more variety for the other classes who just end up chugging potions and occasionally using a suspicious oil. Oh, and it has Dark Souls 2 durability, which is about as fun as it sounds. And good luck spotting the tiny little HUD indicator before your weapon hits 0 durability and quantum tunnels away. Enemy variety is fine. I didn't expect a whole lot. I didn't get a whole lot. There's some cool enemies, there's these gargoyles that turn to stone to prevent you from attacking them. There's a lot of spell casting with the later enemies, which is quite cool, considering a lot of the early enemies are just melee. But you quickly learn the 2, maybe 3 enemies on a floor and how to maneuver around them. It's not groundbreaking, but then, at the time, it probably was. When you consider the game didn't have an encyclopedia of reference material like its descendants, it was more than forgivable for a game at the time to only have 4 or 5 monsters and just create minor variations. Now, if for some reason you've watched this far but don't want to be spoiled for the final boss, close your ear holes. Okay, ready? Diablo. Okay, calm down, stop hyperventilating, pick yourself up, maybe pause, have some water. I bring him up, because he is the big stinker in terms of enemy design. He's stupid fast, he casts spontaneous testicular torsion at you whenever you enter his line of sight, he has a giant health pool, he stun locks you in melee. I ended up cheesing him with town portals and health potions. I have no idea how I would have done it otherwise, literally no idea, I cannot see how I would have kited him. Even then I had to be careful not to get stun locked and pounded into gravel. All the other bosses, although they're really mini bosses, were fine. It was just a big finale which was kind of bullshit, and I didn't do the Hellfire dungeons, but regardless this highlights probably the biggest flaw of the game. There was only so much soft skill-based difficulty they could actually implement. I played on normal, I progressed my character's items and attributes to get deeper, but there was only so much challenge that could be achieved with move, attack, heal, move, attack. No complex patterns to learn or abilities to avoid damage. It's worth mentioning there's a really handy speed toggle, which I used liberally in town, and I had it a fair bit above default the rest of the time, because otherwise it's just painful, so that doesn't make it any easier. but it doesn't actually fundamentally change the mechanics anyway, it just makes the game faster or slower. After harping on about the game's biggest weaknesses, it's only fair to examine what it does best, and when you combine the gothic, occasionally grotesque style, the dark colour palette, the somehow previously unmentioned soundtrack, absolutely banging, the slow methodical clearing of floors with highly limited vision, even the clunky 8-directional movement kind of tripping you up, you get atmosphere. So much atmosphere. It is dripping in it. It's been deep fried in atmosphere. And going back to the subject of flaws, it's arguably a character flaw on my part, picking on a lot of the shit that's annoyed my modern sensibilities. It's 27 years old. We're not going up to yellow PCs or at one point for about 6 months gleaming white and going, ooh, they could have been a bit smaller. Oh, only 512 mega RAM. It's a bit basic. I can dislike them, they can annoy me, but I can't in good faith blame the development team. It's utterly ridiculous. And when you consider the gigantic range of samples, pretty much all of which are inspired by it, it's not fair. All these games imitate this game, not the other way around. Okay, that's enough dodgy analysis. Does it actually hold up? Well, yes. It feels bare bones compared to modern titles, most of them, but that's because it is bare bones. It's old. It's the prototype, the blueprint, the grandpappy of ARPGs. And, somehow, it's still in the top 2 Diablo games ever released, so not bad going really. It's quick to get into, it's simple, you don't have to worry about builds much, it's casual. But it should be free. Officially free, Blizzard, not just hypothetically Internet Archive free, officially free. Just chuck the ISO up somewhere. God knows he needs the positive media attention. Nobody should be paying for this game. And that's the end of it. I don't know how to end this.